Hello, everyone, and welcome to this next edition of the Møller Institute's Leadership Insights. My name is Adam Billing. I'm an associate here at the Møller, and I'm very excited and pleased to be welcoming my friend and colleague Portia Hickey to this session. Portia is a chartered organizational psychologist and the founder of Thrive Matters, and is going to be sharing some of her very insightful perspectives on leadership here in these very rapidly changing and unusual times. So welcome, Portia. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks so much. Very excited to be talking with you.
Wonderful. Well, we're just going to jump right into it. So the big question is, in this current context that we find ourselves in, what do you see are the most critical, or even the most critical leadership attribute for today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm getting asked that a lot, especially around what's going to be required of leaders in the future. And I think we are, even before the pandemic, what we were faced with was very much a VUCA world, the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And the pandemic has just, exacerbated that. And I think we are currently dealing with so much that's without precedent. The locking down of society, the closing of schools, the moving online to online learning of universities. There's just people having to remote work when they've never been allowed or able to do that before. And so much change. And I think also we're all en masse dealing with a level of uncertainty that we have as a human population never had to deal with before. So I'm very much of the view that mindset is going to be the critical thing that leaders need, that we are developing as a human race already, that our mindset around uncertainty, dealing with uncertainty, for example, is something that is evolving probably quite rapidly at the moment. And it's interesting, I'm homeschooling my son, the joys of homeschooling. And one of the topics he's been learning about is the African savannah. And there was a paper recently published by Northwestern University about the impact on the human race of people hunting in the African savannah. And they called it basically that process, that context poured rocket fuel on our evolutionary brains. Because all of a sudden we needed to be able to plan and anticipate the future. And that process, changed our brains, changed how we evolved as a human race. And I'm of the view that we could be in a kind of situation like that at the moment as well, where it's pouring rocket fuel on our brains, and that we are all dealing with uncertainty like we have never had to experience before.
Well, that's a really fascinating point of view. If you could sort of project us, few years into the future, when the impact of that, that quick burn from the rocket fuel has kind of taken place, what's different? What would we notice is different about the mindset that successful leaders are really inhabiting in that future?
Yeah, it's a really good point. So I think what would be different is that we will tend to approach uncertainty with a more curious mindset. So one of the changes I think the leaders can make right now that would be helpful, but I think we're going to need to adapt to and increasingly make as a species, as a race, is to approach the uncertainty with curiosity, rather than the fearful reaction, which is completely normal and natural, that a lot of us are feeling now, which tends to close our minds and get us to think about the fight or flight response. We're scanning the environment for information that tells us whether we need to be afraid or not. It instead uses a different circuitry when we're curious and switch our mindset to a more curious mindset. It uses a different circuitry of our brain, which is actually the reward circuitry. So we get a dopamine hit, which is positive. And it's really interesting because what that does too is it accelerates our ability to learn. Not just learn what we're focusing on at that time when we're feeling curious, but the research has shown that we become better at learning full stop and better at retaining information. So we're better at scanning the environment and picking up information from the environment, which is really important for identifying opportunities for all different things. But ultimately, it's a much happier, positive mental health space as well than being fearful. So I think looking to the future, I think we're going to become increasingly practiced at that. And so probably then we will all as a species get better at scanning the environment and picking up on these opportunities and becoming more agile. And hopefully getting better at deliberate mindfulness, that mindfully being able to switch our mindsets when we need to, paying attention of where we're at, the impact that's having, and then changing that when we need to in order to get into a more constructive headspace.
That's fascinating. I really like that idea of approaching uncertainty with curiosity. I mean, other than fear. I mean, it really hits home. It makes a lot of sense.
For innovation, it's critical, isn't it?
Yeah, fundamental, absolutely. You know, so that paints a really clear picture. I mean, if you could almost take the sort of flip side of that same question of thinking of sort of the leadership characteristics that we see today or have seen, you know, traditionally in the recent past, which of those do you think is going to become less important over time?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a couple of things. One of the ones I'm curious about, I'm interested in, is whether there's going to be a paradigm shift around this extroversion. So that's one piece around. Generally, there's a belief that, you know, there's an association between extroversion and effective leadership. But regardless of whether you're extroverted or introverted, in the current pandemic where we're having to work increasingly remotely, we're dealing with people, either we're working remotely or there's a need to be fluid anyway in terms of how we're engaging with people. We can't expect to meet them face to face anymore. And that regardless then of about our preference or our personality type, we're going to still, again, have to be a bit more mindful about if we're extroverted, how do we make the most of the engagements that we do have via Zoom to gather the most information. And it's not just a chat fests are nice, but you're using that to really build a relationship with the individual. And likewise with the introversion, I think perhaps introverted leaders perhaps will fare a little bit better in the current context. They're used to working, I think, in a more reflective way, perhaps, or at least with less sort of more comfortable with less face-to-face contact. But they too will need to be mindful around, are they reaching out enough, and are they having, you know, staying connected with people? Because and so I think that's one thing. And I think the other thing I guess I'd caution leaders against, and I think that will become increasingly important that we don't do, is wait for clarity. So it's really interesting, you know, when you've got a lot of uncertainty, that, you know, people will tend to wait and go, well, I'll just wait till, you know, going back to school might be a good example. Just wait till there's a little bit more clarity before I send my kids back to school, or I just wait to see how this pans out a little bit. And we don't always have the luxury to do that. Especially in rapidly evolving times, we really need leaders that can make decisions and act without a level of clarity, because no one has that clarity. So literally no one knows what the next 6 months is going to hold for anyone. So in that sense, it's nice because we can't be expected to know. We can only do our best with the judgment.
Understood. So something about so decisiveness being a characteristic that is really going to matter at this point. And also, I think it's fascinating what you're saying about the extroversion being something that's going to kind of take a back seat, because so much of the work is, I mean, we've seen the same thing in the innovation space, more projects where there's more asynchronous work, and you see better results often coming because people do have more time to reflect, which allows some of those other sort of less extroverted creative styles to really shine. So that's really very interesting. Good stuff. I mean, so how would you see now, as far as if these new leadership styles are coming to the fore? I know you've talked a lot about too, like the impact that that's going to have more broadly on humanity. Can you sort of paint? I mean, we're all curious to know, what does the future hold? I mean, can you paint us a picture? If you sort of follow that direction of travel, what we would notice that is markedly different from the world that we're used to now as these things really take hold?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't have a better crystal ball than anyone else in terms of what the future holds, unfortunately. I wish I did. But I think there's, I think, again, I come back to the mindset. I think there's more focus around, I think there's great opportunities in the current context for leaders in terms of there is an ample number of what we call, psychologists call moments of truth.
Yep.
Whether you know it or not, everybody is vulnerable right now. Everybody is feeling vulnerable in some way. Maybe not every day, but there is a vulnerability that hasn't been there. So how you as a leader and you as an organization engage with people around the vulnerability, and that's an opportunity to build trust. When people are vulnerable, doing the right thing by employees, engaging with them, supporting them, and building that is a great opportunity to build that trust and build that engagement with employees. And that will last a really long time, and that will instill loyalty, and it's just huge benefits that come from that. And I think the other thing is the other moment of truth that is in abundance, I think, at the moment is errors. We're going to make errors when we are working remotely, be it having trouble connecting on Zoom, or be it whatever it might be. And again, as leaders, how we respond to those errors gives us a huge opportunity to create psychological safety with people in terms of errors are okay, let's learn from them. I'm not going to blame you, I'm not going to get angry, but let's look at this and how I can support you better, or what we can learn from this situation. So there's huge positives that can be gained from this, and I think the leaders that are thinking about that and being mindful of their own mindset, thinking about the opportunities they have to support it and better engage with their followers and colleagues and things, will really see dividends. And in fact, Heidi Gardner from Harvard has done some interesting research in the last financial crisis that looked at leaders who collaborate, and the leaders that collaborated going into the financial crisis saw a much smaller and sometimes no dip at all in their revenue. It was a number of professional service firms, I think, that she did the research with. So it's from a business, there's a strong business case as well, because through maintaining that engagement, which is a bit counter instinct, again, because generally when we're in a crisis, we like to hunker down, just narrow our focus and focus on what matters, rather than going out and speaking to colleagues and asking them, how are you doing right now? How are you feeling? And spending time on those sorts of things. So that the ones that do that, I think, will have a number of really significant follow-on benefits that, that will help us, the organisation, but them as individuals as well.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you for that. Wondering, is there any leader that you know or have worked with that comes to mind who really sort of exemplifies some of these really critical traits?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's leaders, I think, in different snippets that I've seen that are really impressive. And obviously the one that's got a huge amount of attention is Jacinta Ardern, in terms of how she's handled, a political leader in terms of how handling the pandemic. But I guess what I've been struck by lately that has really inspired me is the bravery that I'm seeing from organizational leaders. So particularly around the Black Lives Matters movement, in terms of the number of leaders and organizations that are really asking themselves tough, emotionally tough questions, like, have I personally done enough? Am I perpetuating institutional racism? Is there anything we can do as an organization? And addressing asking these questions and addressing them in really vulnerable type situations, in focus groups, and bringing people in and speaking to employees and getting them to open up and opening themselves up in an emotional way that I haven't seen before. And that I find that really inspirational, because I think that, again, it just can lead to transformational change that is very much needed. And so that, I think that's the thing. And to a lesser extent, in one sense, but maybe not to a lesser extent, is the bravery around working differently. So there's a lot of leaders, I think, that are taking a chance and taking a risk, though that might be a negative wording on it, but to work differently, to do things differently. And I think so long as they're being upfront around what they know and what they don't know, and what they're trying to do, then I think that's bravery. It's impressive bravery, and again, could lead to really transformational change. I was talking to an amazing cardiologist a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying the change that he was trying to implement in the NHS over the last 5 years, but was struggling with, got done in 3 weeks in the pandemic. And he said, you will not recognize the NHS. When you re-engage with it, it is a different place. Wow. And that's really, I think, inspiring. Yeah, that's inspiring.
Absolutely. No, that's an incredible story, and it you know, the kind of acceleration that we have been seeing, over these months, I think there will be untold changes that we'll be observing when we kind of come back to experience that new normal. It's an incredible example with the NHS. Final question for you: if for the purpose of sharing insights with the people who are viewing us here, if there was a single takeaway, a leadership sort of insight that you would offer up for our viewers as sort of a final takeaway, what would it be?
Stay connected. So I think there's a lot of anxiety around a number of different areas. Where's my deal flow going to come from? I don't know what's going to happen in the future. And I think the more that we can, again, this is probably counterintuitive, but stay connected with our friends, our stakeholders, our clients, customers, colleagues, followers, whoever they are, stay connected with them in a real sense, in an emotional sense, in a meaningful way. I think that the more we will learn and evolve through this, and get the support that we need, that we all need to have a constructive mindset, but also, I guess, from a business perspective, identify the opportunities where we can really make a difference in people's lives, where the business opportunities are. So yeah, I think if it was one phrase, it would be stay connected.
I love it. Yeah. That's fantastic. Well, Portia, thank you so much for your time. This has been really valuable. And there'll be plenty of information if you'd like to get in touch with Portia. So just let us know. Please be in touch here at the Møller Institute. And we look forward to seeing you for the next installment of Leadership Insights, which will be next week. But until then, wishing everyone all the very best. Thank you very much.
Bye.